Have you ever thrown up? Puked your guts out, hurled, left an offering with the porcelain god? Have you ever had motion sickness? Tends to happen to us when we get into a situation that is new, a what's next for us, that even if we're excited about it, there is a sense of the unknown, change that is coming. We looked at this this past week. We talked about, what happens and can we really prepare for our what's next. And we discovered that it is far more important, what your behavior is than how your hair looks. And we talked about looking into the mirror to get prepared for the day. And the mirror always demands a response, right? We don't go after we've looked in the mirror in the morning and our hair is all disheveled and we see our pajamas are wrinkled and stuff. We don't look in the mirror and go, okay, well, I'm going to go to work. I did my duty. I looked in the mirror, and then we just go to work like that with wrinkled pajamas and hair all of, sticking up in every different direction, because soon our boss would call us in and say, you can't come to work this way. You're going to have to go home and change, and you're going to be docked from pay because you didn't get ready. You didn't come prepared. In other words, what he's saying is you looked in the mirror, but you didn't answer the call. You didn't do what was necessary to get ready for the day. And same thing as with God's Word. In this passage that we read today, if you even skip up a few verses above that, you see how it begins to talk about the promise. And it says, when God made, this is verse 13, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. God made a promise and said, I swear by myself that this is coming to pass. There's nobody greater than me. You can take this one to the bank. The promise of God are sure. But when we walk into our what's next, it could be the baby that's on the way. It could be a new job opportunity. It could be a new city that we're moving to. It could be a wedding that looms ahead. It could be some kind of a business start or business opportunity. And we discussed last week that we go through these stages as we get to the what's next. And it starts off with what's next, and then the transition stage, and that's where sometimes the motion sickness comes in. We really start feeling like we don't know how to embrace what's ahead, and it can be very paralyzing. So today I want to talk about motion sickness a little bit, and I also want to talk about how we can deal with that so that we can move on, embrace the change that is happening in our lives, and learn to mitigate the stress levels and bring all of that back down to a kind of a norm. Back in the summer of 2000, Michelle and I went to a conference called Challenge 1000. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were really excited about the opportunity to go. John Maxwell was leading the conference, and there were many, many pastors there in a large church that were coming together to talk about church growth, to talk about the dynamics. Now, the conference itself was really kind of fascinating, and it helped me a lot personally, because I always had a picture of what I thought the pastor would look like who had a large church, a mega church. And so I always thought that he didn't look anything like me. And so it was very encouraging to go to this conference, because as we met these pastors who were having a lot of success and their churches were growing, one of the things that surfaced right away was that God is the grower of churches, right? He's the one who adds to the church ultimately, and there's a lot of effort that we can put, effort that we can put behind it, and it's not that we shouldn't do anything and we shouldn't prepare, but ultimately it's God that's stirring the pot and adding to the group and the growth and stuff like this. Listen to the kind of guys we saw up there. One of them was a coach, and this guy kept repeating words because I don't think he had a vocabulary past about 150 words. So he just kept using the same words over and over again. He was a coach, and that was his background. He had been a coach almost his whole life, and they decided in retirement he was going to start a church, and start a church in his barn in a farm community. And so there was a little rural town they lived in, and they started this church in the barn, and they set out about 10 or 15 chairs. The neighbors and people that they knew invited him over, and Sundays passed, and pretty soon they had to set out like 25 to 30 chairs, and then all of a sudden they were setting out 50 in the barn, and then they outgrew the barn. And, they had to go into the city and find a location. And he talked about how one Easter, 200 people walked into his church and never left. It was amazing what happened as that church continued to grow. And as he was talking to us, his church was over 1,000 people. And I'm sitting there going, wow, this guy, it's amazing what God can do. And then, of course, the guys that, one of the guys that came up was a guy typically that I would expect to have grown a church. He was an author. He wore glasses, and he was very studious looking, and his intellect was really high, and his vocabulary was great. And he was the guy that I thought, yeah, this is the guy that is what a big church looks like. But as we went through 11 guys over the next 3 days that talked about what happened, the consistency was their passion for Jesus. The people had come together, had a passion for Jesus and for the community in which they lived. And the results were God grew the church. He exploded the church. It wasn't just a place for them, for the people that were attending these large churches, that just to go get a weekend refreshing. It was a mission, and they saw an opportunity ahead of them. It was very exciting. But Michelle and I arrived a couple of days in advance of the conference. And so we were very excited about it, but we had some time to kill. Never been to Atlanta, Georgia before, so we decided to go tour the city and see what was going on. The first thing we did was have a really bad meal, right? We drove through, it was late night. We drove through a little drive-through thing, and it looked great, but the food was awful. So we had that little bad start. We got up early the next morning, and we went to Six Flags over Georgia. We had not been to a Six Flags in quite a while, and we forgot that it's like just roller coasters, one right after another. So we started getting on these roller coasters. The line wasn't big, and we could get on there about as fast as we could. So we rode one, and it was like, a little shaky. We got on the next one, boom, a little more shaky. We got on the third one, and by the time we got off the fourth roller coaster, I could not walk in a straight line. I was bumping into people like a drunk person, And I was still trying to be like, in my 20s, and I was in, we were in our late 30s, and there was just no comparison, to how I could handle these rides, and I was just bumbling around, and so Michelle, she was looking kind of pale, and we both kind of found a park bench, and we sat down. And we said, we gotta come to an agreement here. Let's rest between roller coasters. She said, yeah, okay, we'll shop, between roller coasters. We'll do something different, because motion sickness had kicked in, and, we just could not hardly stand straight. And I don't know if you've ever been there before, if you've had those kinds of experiences before, but it is not comfortable. And when you have motion sickness, it kind of paralyzes you. You just want to sit still, and you don't want to move, and you just feel like you don't have the energy or the power to do the things that you need to do. We lose balance. We lose our balance during transitions. We're not the same people that we were before that comes. And God knows that. That's a part of the stretching and the growth that takes place. It's why He wants to bring a what's next into your life, because He wants to stretch you and grow you and kind of get you off guard so that you can hear things you haven't heard before, learn things you haven't learned before, and bring about change in your life. Even when the transitions are good transitions, they're difficult. I remember the first time that, I was elected pastor, senior pastor. We had been at this church for a number of years, and I started out as youth and children's pastor, and then, I became the associate pastor, and finally we became the lead pastors here. Now, you would think I had all the training, I was prepared. I mean, I had ran every one of those programs. I had done everything in that church that you could possibly do. I even taught, the missionettes class one time for somebody. I pitch hit for little girls in a missionette class. So I had taught that. I taught it was called the Royal Rangers. I taught their classes, for the boys. I taught youth classes. I was a janitor. That was how I started out, to get my pay. I knew that place inside out. I had vacuumed it a million times. Got some of my best sermons just vacuuming in the auditorium, just preaching to myself, really getting under conviction as I was going back and forth with a vacuum. And then I cleaned, toilets and, just there's not a, I'd done just everything you could do, and done some physical work on the building, a lot of physical work. We had grown and had to do a lot of remodels and that kind of thing. And so I knew every square inch of that church, and I really thought I was ready to step into that role. But I can remember after we had a Sunday, and our one of the leaders, the top leaders in our organization, came and prayed over Michelle and I. He led the service, and it was kind of like, now you're the pastors and you're taking over. And I remember walking in the office on a Monday, that big, huge desk. I was moving into that new office, into the pastor's office, and putting all my stuff away and seeing that big desk and sitting down behind it. The guy who had spoke on Sunday had left a note there for me about what being a shepherd was all about. And as I was reading through that, I just broke down. I started weeping. But God, I have no idea what to do. I had looked at this what's next my whole life and thought, this is where I want to be. But when I got it and I sat behind that big chair and I thought about all of the people of that church and their needs and the issues of their lives and the things that they were going through, it was overwhelming to me. And I thought, what can I do? I have nothing to give. I have nothing to offer. And I got motion sickness, if you will, and I began to get kind of paralyzed and recognized that this was going to be so challenging. I had been a volunteer in that church. I had worked with youth, with children, worship, a Sunday school teacher for 8 years, a minister intern for 2 years at another church, and youth and children's pastors in that church for 8.5 years, an associate pastor for 4 years, and yet now I'm the lead pastor, and I'm overwhelmed at this next step. What do you do when you get motion sickness? There are two things that they tell you that are good for you to do when you get motion sickness, and I'll share this story a little bit later, but I had some motion sickness on the boat, and so they tell you to fix your eyes on the horizon. It's a good thing to sit at the back of the boat and hold on. So they want you to have something to focus on and something to hold on to. And when you and I go through motion sickness, it's good for us to have something to focus on and something to hold on to. And that's what this passage that we read today is laying out for us. It begins by saying, now when people take an oath, they call on someone greater than themselves to hold them to it. And without any question, that oath is binding. And God also bound himself to an oath. So what is the difference between a promise and an oath? The dictionary says that a promise is a transaction between two persons whereby the first person undertakes in the future to render some service or gift to the second person or devotes something valuable in the now and the here to use. In the dictionary it says oath is to attest to the truth of a statement or contract. So we might just say that the promise is, bound by and secured by the person's good name or the assets of the person or whatever it might be. When we go get a loan, we make a promise or sign a promissory note, and we have put down a certain amount of money. We are riskers, we are investors in that process. And the oath, though, is the end of the story, right? When we say, I kept it, I did it. When I paid off my first car, for the very first time, had a loan and paid the car off. I think I was like 19, maybe 20. And when I got that letter in the mail from the bank that says, you have paid off, you paid your last note. And that was the oath about, I had fulfilled the promise that I had made. I had taken care of what I had originally said that I was going to do. Now, some passages render this reading, they swear by someone greater. And you've heard this in courtrooms, and you've seen this maybe on TV as well, where they say, you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, swearing on something greater than themselves. And so it goes on to say that so that those who received the promise could be perfectly sure that he would never change his mind. An oath declares that the one who promised is going to fulfill that promise. And God uniquely is able to both make the promise and see that he's fulfilled the promise in the end. Because as Lawrence talked to us about a few weeks ago, he's not the captive of time, but lives outside of time, so God can both say, I promised it and I did it. Yeah. I promised it and I fulfilled it. He accomplished the promise. He testified about it. When we come face to face with with God, and we get to our next steps, and we feel a little queasy, God has already been there, and God has already done that. Isn't that awesome? In this passage, he's talking about God has jumped into your time in advance and has prepared everything, and he has it ready. So the promise that he's made to you, he's already been up here and taken care of it. He's already seen that it's going to be fulfilled. What he needs you to do is get in motion. He needs you to move and towards what he has promised for your life. He needs some action from you because he's already up there and taking care of that, right? So he's both made the promise and seen the fulfillment of that promise. Think about how awesome this is when you get into your what's next for getting ready for life and getting ready for what God has prepared for your life, that you are right now anxious about your what's next and worried about your what's next, and God's already there. He has already been there. He's already cleaned the place up. He's already got it ready for you. And we are having motion sickness about something that God has already been involved in. Verse 18 says, these two things are unchangeable with respect to the promise and the oath, because it is impossible for God to lie. This is a good one to use. There's an atheist trap they might throw at you sometime. They say, can God do anything? And you'll say, oh yeah, God can do anything. And they say, can he make a rock too heavy for himself to lift? And so when they ask you, can God do anything? The answer is no, God cannot violate himself. God is not a man that he should lie, the Bible says. God cannot violate who he is, and he is not a man that he should lie, and he is unchangeable, and he cannot lie. And he cannot deceive, and he cannot do all of that is outside of his nature. It says, these two things are unchangeable because it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. He is a God that does not change, and he will not lie, and we can take refuge in that. And there it is, what we were talking about a moment ago, something you can focus on and something you can hold on to. And then this is the clincher, verse 19. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain into God's inner sanctuary. Jesus has, read this with me, has already gone in there for us. He has become our eternal high priest. An anchor of hope. You can live several days without eating. I could probably go a month. All right? You can make it a few days without anything to drink. You can live, if you're in that kind of shape, our kids were swimmers when they were younger, you can live without air for up to a couple of minutes. All right? But you cannot live with hope 1 second. If you have no hope, you can't go on. Now, hope is not, a psychological kind of thing. It's a theological thing. Hope has a beating heart. Hope is alive. Hope is not the best-selling book in the self-help aisle that helps you think better than you've been thinking and get a different mindset. And it's not about that at all. Hope has a heartbeat. And the Bible says that Jesus is hope. Yes. You can't live 1 second without hope. Now listen, I'm on the other end of this thing, and I can prove this to you. You want to spend some time with me as a pastor. When hope leaves people, the breath of life leaves their body. I've watched it over and over again. I've been to the hospital and stood by the bedside of people young and old, and when hope is gone, they're gone. When the doctor says it's over and they decide they're not going to hope further, and hold on further for something that God may do, they're gone. My grandmother went in to stand beside my grandfather, and he was suffering with cancer and has gone long beyond what the doctor said was possible for him. And he was suffering and he was holding on. And my grandmother grabbed his hands and she said, "You go on and go be with Jesus. And you prepare a place for us, and I'm going to come soon behind you." And he looked up at her, and she reached down and kissed him, and he exhaled, and he left this world and went to be with Jesus. When you stop hoping, your heart stops beating. And the Bible says that the greatest hope, or the greatest that we have of hope, is in Jesus Christ. We have something to hold on to that is an anchor that not only can we hold on to it, but it holds on to us. It secures us. It keeps us. The cure for motion sickness, for your what's next, is to be anchored in hope. You're facing something that you don't know what it's going to look like or how you're going to do it. Whether it's something that you're excited about in the sense of it's a new job or new opportunity, or it's bad news from the doctor about an illness or a family member or something like that, and you're getting ready to embrace that, but you just don't know if you're going to be able to. You need something to hold on to, and Jesus is your anchor. You need an anchor in life that is strong enough to anchor you so that you can be anchored, whether it's marriage, it's a new baby, it's a job loss, it's an empty nest, or an instant full nest. We had a couple of friends of ours who were pastors and leaders in Phoenix, and they had already kind of raised a family, and all of those kids were gone, and so they had a heart to help and to reach out to help other kids, and so they were going to adopt a little 2-year-old from the state, little girl. And everything had gone through, and it all looked great for them, and that they had great expectations about their what's next. They still were a little worried about it when they got a call from the state, and the state said, "She's really bonded with another little girl there that is that is 2 years old, and she's really bonded with her. So we would like to send these two out together. Can you guys take another one in your home?" And they're like, "Yeah, we didn't know this, but yes, it's a gift. We'll do that. We'll accept another child into our life." The phone had hardly rested, a few days to where it rang again, and the state said we had to take her sister in too. The mother had 2 children, and the mother is now going to prison. They said we also had to take her older sister in. She's 5 years old. Can you take another one? They're like, wow. Talk about your what's next. From an empty nest to a full nest. 2 2-year-olds and a 5-year-old, just like that. And they had an anchor in Jesus. And they were able to secure themselves in the hope that God was going to see them through. There were financial issues, all kinds of things. We were a part of the solution in our church. We had a great big outpouring shower for them. There was hundreds of people that were there, and they brought all kinds of stuff, man. I mean, for these kids, playhouse and clothing, and instantly they were ready to go. Diapers, that would get them through the year, and all kinds of things as the church family came together to help them with their what's next. They were anchored in the hope of Jesus Christ. And so my question is this: if you're not anchored in Jesus, here's my question for you. What's holding you back from being anchored in Jesus and in hope? If you ever get to the place that you believe you can handle your what's next on your own, you're in for some serious motion sickness. In the late 1990s, I went out with some friends on a boat, in the Sea of Cortez, and we fished, and it was a great day. And on the way back, the waters were kind of choppy, and I made a real fateful bad decision. I decided to go down below and get some supplies down below deck. And man, I'll tell you, instantly when I got down below deck and the boat was tossing around, I started feeling like I was going to start tossing, and I was just, oh man, I crawled back up the stairs to the back. I must have been like green because the guys were like, quick, get to the back of the boat. It's like they knew, something was probably coming, and I'm climbing towards the back of the boat, and I grabbed on and I sat down and I fixed my eyes on the horizon as this boat is bouncing and coming back in. And slowly but surely that motion sickness started lifting. And I started thinking about my anchor in Jesus and my hope in Jesus, and fixing my eyes on the horizon, and that everything was going to be good. He had already been in my tomorrow. Yes. He knew that we were going to make it back safely. He knew everything was going to be okay. And slowly but surely, motion sickness started lifting and breaking out in a light sweat and feeling better, like relieved that I was going to make it through this experience. I would suggest to you that if you are not anchored in Jesus, there is one word that describes why you're not anchored in Jesus. A rich man would give away his wealth to have his health. I met an unfaithful man who would love to rewind the clock to regain his family. I spoke with a young woman who settled for Mr. Right now, who wished she had waited for Mr. Right. I met new parents, I was a new parent, who are so worried about everything with that new baby. They say stuff like, is he breathing? Is that a rash? Should we take him to the doctor? Is he supposed to sleep that long? When should we start feeding him with a bottle? How come he threw up? Motion sickness. I would not want to face a good what's next or a bad what's next without Jesus as the anchor. I believe the single greatest obstacle to becoming a Christian is pride. Pride. It's not that you know more scientifically than somebody else. If you're totally honest with yourself, because science, Lawrence delivered a beautiful message a few weeks ago, is such a leap. There was nothing. And from nothing came something. And then that something turned into us at some point. It takes faith to believe in all of it. Why not redirect your faith and believe that it could have been, in the beginning, there was God.
Yes. Amen.
And that God said, let there be light. And in less than nanoseconds, boom, the universe exploded into being. Science says that's how it happened. They just disagree that God was involved in it. They can't say how it happened. The latest one is the multi-universe theory. And I've heard some of the leading scientists say that aliens came and seeded the planet. Of course, great. Who invented the aliens? Where did they come from? Just always were, Could that alien actually be somebody that's alien to them? But not to us. Pride prevents us from saying 4 life-changing words. These are the hardest steps. We had a 12-step program a number of years in our church in Phoenix at Christ Church. And we had people come through there that had all kinds of addictions and problems and issues in their lives. From sexual addictions to drug addictions to alcohol addictions. And every one of them had to start at the same place that I'm about to tell you right now before help could come for them. They had to own their part in their problem. And that is the most difficult thing. And everything in us tells us that the environment has done this, that other people have done this, that if we had the breaks you had, if I had the breaks you had, I wouldn't be like I am today. You're the one that was lucky. You didn't get abused. You didn't grow up poor. You didn't have all these different issues in your life. And so pride stands in the way between us saying these 4 words, I am a sinner. I did it. I hurt someone. I lied. I cheated. I did it and I didn't have to. I took what didn't belong to me. I gave in to a sinful nature that is destructive to my life. But every person in that 12-step program that could begin by saying, I'm helpless over the problem that's taking place in my life, they were just right there towards the next 2 steps. I can't. He can. I'm going to let him. They began to believe that there was a higher power that could help them. But pride prevents us from asking for help. Pride says, I can do this, I can change me, I can become better. I just need to read more books, I need to get more discipline, I need to get more willpower, I need to work out, I need to hang out with better people, I need to do this or that or something else, and you're never going anywhere until you stop and say, I am a sinner. I'm in destitute need of a Savior. I can't do it. Pride prevents us from making Jesus the anchor and the hope of our life. Pride prevents us from wanting to let him be the Lord over our lives or the leader over our lives, and it puts us in the driver's seat, and we want to be. And those 3 steps that are necessary for breaking pride are these. First, we have to admit it. I am a sinner. Second, we have to surrender our lives to his lordship and to his leadership. Abdicate the throne that we're sitting on and say, you know what? I'm going to stop making all the decisions for my life. I'm going to stop thinking I know what's best for me. And I'm going to trust that he knows what's best for me. And he knew, because he created me, what I was intended to be. And all the passions, the drives, and the desires that are inside of me towards helping and being a part of the solution on my planet were placed there by him. And he's going to help me learn how to fulfill those things. I don't need culture to tell me how. I don't need other people to tell me how. I don't need various groups to tell me how that I'm supposed to live this out. I need God.
Yes.
And he will show me how to live this out. And finally, put him first in our daily decision making. That he's not an afterthought, but he is the one we consult as we're making our day-to-day decisions and moving forward. During my prayer time on Friday and Saturday, I was telling our team as we gathered this morning that God really shook me about this message, and especially at the close, that he wanted to do something today in this group. I believe God has already been moving in hearts and lives, and started with the opening of worship, and he's been stirring in your hearts. And I believe God is, even now, the Holy Spirit is connecting with a number of you. And he's saying that the solution for you right now is to surrender to him and to make him the Lord and the leader. And there needs to be some action steps. We need to start in the direction that God is kind of leading and calling us. In a moment, I'm going to have the media team play a song. And we're changing a little bit. I talked to our team this morning about how we would normally end the service. We normally would invite our worship team to come up. But in a minute, I'm going to invite instead our prayer team to come across the front, whoever would like to come. And we're going to play this song, Come to the Altar. And when this song starts, what I want to encourage you to do is I want to encourage you to do something, to start moving, turning to your seat, moving towards the front if you want, Whatever you feel like is an action you need to take to respond to God's call in your life for a full surrender, a complete surrender to Him, a breaking of pride, and saying, God, I'm no longer going to try to do it my way. I don't care what other people think about me. Really? Seriously? We're going to give, we're going to be concerned about what somebody thinks today in the presence of God? When we meet Him, that's when we need to be concerned about what somebody thinks, what He thinks. I don't care what you think. All right? I love you, but I really don't care what you think about me surrendering my life to Jesus, okay? I hope you're happy about it. But if you don't like it and you don't think I'm doing it right, talk to Him, okay? As they play this song, I want to invite you to stand and make some kind of movement. As our worship prayer team comes, Joan is going to come, and when the song finishes, she's going to help play through.